The office was never meant to feel like home, but for Linda, it had become almost that. Every night she pushed her cart down the quiet hallways, changing trash bags, wiping down desks, listening to the hum of old lights above her head. The world outside Newark's industrial district had long since gone to sleep, but inside this building, the air carried a different kind of restlessness. Her son, Marcus, sat at the round table in the break room, his elbows tucked close as if he were guarding the little stack of note cards in front of him. The cards were bent at the corners, the ink faded, but he handled them carefully, flipping each one over with quiet determination. Spanish verbs, Portuguese phrases, words that most boys his age never thought about at midnight. Linda glanced at him while tying a bag of recycling. She had told him he didn't need to wait for her, didn't need to spend these long nights under the harsh office lights, but he insisted. He said the library closed too early, the apartment was too noisy, and here, at least, he could think. She didn't argue. She liked having him close, even if it meant he saw the hard work she wished he didn't have to. From down the hall, muffled voices broke the silence. At first it was just a low rumble, the kind of sound you dismiss as another late call. But then the tone sharpened, carrying through the glass walls of the executive office. A man's voice, heavy with frustration, rose above the quiet. "We're losing money every minute." Linda stiffened. That was the chief operating officer, the man who never smiled at the cleaning crew, now pacing behind the glass. His phone was on speaker, and through the open break room door Marcus could hear the chaos spilling out. Words tumbling in Spanish, others in Portuguese, none of them landing clearly in English. It sounded less like a business call and more like three people trapped in different rooms, shouting to be understood. Marcus froze, one hand still on a flashcard. His mother caught his eye and shook her head gently, the way mothers do when they want to protect their children from trouble. But the noise down the hall grew louder, the man's voice angrier, and the foreign words sharper. Marcus set the card down slowly. He could feel his heart beat harder, not just from nerves, but from recognition. He knew those sounds. He had practiced them again and again in this very room. The hum of the lights seemed to fade, replaced by the steady thump in his chest. Something inside told him this was not just another night, and before long he would have to decide whether to stay in his seat or step through that glass door. The voices down the hall only grew sharper. The break room door couldn't keep them out now. Marcus could hear the man in the glass office snapping at someone on the line, then a driver's voice pushing back in rushed Portuguese. Another worker cut in with Spanish, words stumbling over each other until the call sounded like a storm no one could control. Ethan, the chief operating officer, slammed his palm on the desk. "I don't care what it takes, get that shipment cleared or we lose the client." His frustration carried through the walls, echoing in the quiet space where Marcus sat. Linda felt her stomach twist. She had worked enough night shifts to know when tempers like that turned dangerous for people at the bottom. If a contract fell apart, someone had to take the blame, and it was never the executives. She kept moving, rag in hand, scrubbing the break room counter with more force than needed. Stay out of it, she thought. Just stay invisible. But Marcus couldn't help listening. The words spilling through that speaker weren't random noise to him. He could pick out the accents, the dropped syllables, even the frustration hidden in the tone. He had studied these phrases under the dim glow of library lamps, written them over and over until his wrist ached. And now they were here, alive, right in front of him. The tension snapped when a supervisor walked past the break room, shaking his head. "This is a waste of time," the man muttered loud enough for them to hear. His eyes flicked toward Marcus with a mocking grin. "What's next? Let the janitor's kid try?" Marcus's face heated, but he stayed quiet. His mother straightened, lips pressed tight, fighting the urge to say something. The supervisor kept walking, muttering under his breath, leaving behind the kind of sting words are meant to leave. For a moment, the only sound was the steady hum of the vending machine. Marcus stared at his cards, at the tiny notes he had written, and felt a spark of defiance flicker inside him. Linda whispered, "Don't," but Marcus pushed his chair back. The legs scraped softly against the tile as he stood. He didn't move quickly, didn't make a scene. He simply walked to the glass office door, lifted his hand, and knocked. The COO turned, eyes narrowing at the sight of a teenager in a hand-me-down hoodie. "What do you want?" Marcus swallowed, then spoke clearly, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. "Sir, if you put them on one call, I think I can help." The room went silent. For a heartbeat, all that noise from the speakerphone, the arguing, the shouting, faded into the background. Ethan, the man in charge, blinked at Marcus like he wasn't sure he'd heard him right. "You?" His tone was sharp, clipped as if the very idea insulted him. "Kid, this isn't a game, we're talking millions of dollars." Marcus's throat tightened, but he held his ground. "I know," he said quietly, "but I can understand them. Spanish, Portuguese. I've studied both." Linda rushed forward, wiping her hands on her cleaning rag. "I'm sorry, sir, he didn't mean—" Ethan cut her off with a wave. "No, let him finish." His eyes narrowed on Marcus, searching for the bluff. "You're telling me you can make sense of that mess on the line?" Marcus nodded once. He didn't trust his voice not to shake. The supervisor, who had sneered earlier, poked his head back in, smirking. "This should be good. What's he going to do, Google translate it for us?" The laugh stung, but Marcus didn't look away from Ethan. He knew this was the moment. Either they let him try, or he'd walk back to the break room with his mother's disappointment heavy in the air. Ethan exhaled, long and impatient. "Fine, one chance. Don't waste my time." He hit a button, and the foreign voices spilled loud and raw into the office again. The driver on the line spoke first, Portuguese rolling fast, words pressed together like a train that wouldn't slow down. The foreman snapped back in Spanish, frustration rising with every syllable. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Marcus. Marcus felt his palms sweat. For a split second, every late night in the library, every card he had scribbled on, every hour of repeating verbs to himself, all of it pressed on him at once. His mother stood behind him, whispering his name, begging him silently to sit back down. But Marcus didn't sit. He lifted his chin, waited for the driver to finish, and then opened his mouth. The first words he spoke weren't in English. The room seemed to lean in, every ear tuned to the teenager who had no business standing in a boardroom, no title after his name, just the courage to try. Marcus spoke in Portuguese first, his words steady, rolling with the same rhythm he had practiced late at night. The driver on the other end paused, then answered with relief, the anger in his tone softening as he realised someone finally understood him. Without missing a beat, Marcus shifted into Spanish, repeating the driver's message for the foreman. His sentences were clear, his grammar sharp, but more than that, he spoke with respect, not the clipped impatience that had filled the call before. Ethan leaned forward, his arms no longer crossed. The supervisor who had mocked Marcus now stared with his mouth slightly open. Even Linda, her hands still clutching the rag, forgot to breathe. Marcus wrote numbers quickly on a scrap of paper, explaining in English, "The contract says delivery at place, not delivered duty paid. They're holding the containers because the paperwork listed it wrong. They just need corrected terms and a proper code." Ethan grabbed the paper, scanning it, his brow furrowing. "That's exactly what they've been screaming about for 2 hours. Marcus didn't stop. He repeated the corrected code back into Portuguese, then confirmed it in Spanish, his voice calm, reassuring both sides. The shouting gave way to short replies, then to the clacking of a keyboard somewhere at the port. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise had been. A new voice broke in, official and crisp. "Containers released." Ethan blinked, almost disbelieving. "Released?" "Yes, sir," Marcus answered, translating smoothly. "They've cleared it." For a moment the office froze. Then Ethan let out a short, stunned laugh. The supervisor cursed under his breath. And Linda, her eyes welled as she pressed a hand to her mouth. Her son had just done what a room full of adults couldn't. Marcus felt his chest rise with something he hadn't expected. Not pride, not yet, but the quiet knowledge that he belonged in this moment. Ethan set the phone down, staring at the boy. His voice, when it came, was lower, stripped of arrogance. "Kid, what did you just do?" For a long moment no one moved. The call had ended, the shipment was freed, but the silence in that glass office felt almost louder than the shouting that came before. Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair, studying Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. The boy stood there clutching his notepad, shoulders tight, waiting for someone to tell him he had crossed a line. The supervisor broke first, his laugh sharp and nervous. What just happened was a fluke. Anyone could have stumbled through that. Linda stiffened, her hand gripping the edge of the desk. She wanted to defend her son, but she had learned long ago that speaking up could cost her a job she couldn't afford to lose. Marcus swallowed, lowering his eyes, already bracing for the dismissal. But then Ethan spoke. "Anyone?" he repeated, his tone flat. "We've been on the phone for 2 hours and none of my team solved it. Yet this kid," he pointed at Marcus, "did it in 10 minutes. The supervisor's grin faltered. Linda blinked hard, torn between pride and dread. She whispered, "Marcus, please, let's go. You've helped enough." But Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "Not yet. I need to know. Where did you learn to do that?" Marcus hesitated, then pulled a worn library card from his pocket, holding it like it was proof of something greater than himself. "Here," he said simply. "At the library." The room went quiet again, the weight of those words hanging heavier than any boast could have. Ethan narrowed his eyes, not in anger now, but in disbelief. "The library, that's your explanation?" Marcus nodded once. His voice was calm, but his heart pounded. "Yes, sir, that's where I spend my nights." Ethan leaned back, shaking his head slowly as if the answer only raised more questions. And then, after a beat, he reached across the desk and slid a new document toward Marcus. "All right then," he said, "let's see if lightning can strike twice." The paper slid across the desk was heavier than it looked. A full page of dense text, sharp black print on white, sentences stitched together in a language Marcus had only studied through borrowed books and late-night practice. German. Ethan tapped the top of the page. "This came in from one of our partners in Europe. None of my team caught the mistake buried in here. If you can read this, prove it." The supervisor leaned against the doorway with a smirk, arms folded. "Go ahead, kid. Show us how smart you really are." Linda's breath caught. She whispered under her breath, "Marcus, you don't have to..." But she stopped when she saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't arrogance, it was quiet resolve. Marcus took the page carefully, scanning line by line. The words felt both familiar and strange, like walking through a street he had only ever seen on a map. He steadied his breathing, blocking out the tapping of the supervisor's shoe against the floor. After a moment, Marcus looked up. "This line," he said, pointing halfway down the page, "it says the delivery is guaranteed immediately. But the verb here actually means at once after approval. That's not the same thing, it changes the timeline." Ethan leaned in, eyes narrowing. "You're telling me we've been promising something we couldn't deliver?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. That's why your partners have been frustrated. They thought you weren't keeping your word, but the contract itself was mistranslated." The supervisor rolled his eyes. "Lucky guess." Marcus ignored him. He explained the rest in plain English, breaking the text into clear terms. Shipment windows, approval stages, penalties. He didn't rush. He spoke like he wanted everyone in the room to understand, even his mother, who had never read a business contract in her life. Ethan rubbed his jaw, staring at the page as if the letters themselves had betrayed him. That one line could have cost us millions. Linda pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes wet. She had always known her son was bright, but hearing him speak with such calm authority in this room made her feel something deeper. Pride, yes, but also fear. Fear that the higher he reached, the harder the world would try to pull him down. The supervisor scoffed. "What's next? You're going to put him on the payroll?" Ethan didn't answer. He just looked at Marcus, really looked, as though weighing a decision that would change everything. Finally, he said quietly, "Tomorrow morning, be here at 8. There's a meeting I want you in." Morning light spilled across the boardroom table, but the mood was anything but warm. The suits around the room were polished, their expressions cold. Marcus sat at the far end, shoulders squared, though his hoodie looked out of place against their pressed jackets. Ethan began. "Yesterday this young man saved a major contract. Today I want you to see why he's here." A grey-haired executive leaned forward, irritation plain in his voice. "Ethan, with all due respect, we can't gamble with a client on the line. This is a company, not a classroom experiment." Marcus felt his throat tighten, but he didn't lower his eyes. He had heard that tone before. Teachers, neighbours, strangers. People who decided what he couldn't do before he even opened his mouth. The video screen flickered to life. A partner from South America appeared, his words pouring fast and sharp in Spanish. Frustration rolled off every syllable. Ethan turned to Marcus. Go ahead. Marcus leaned forward, answering in Spanish with a calm steadiness that seemed to surprise even himself. He translated the client's grievances into English, clear and precise. Then, when Ethan responded, Marcus carried his words back into Spanish, smoothing them so they didn't sound offensive, only respectful. But halfway through, the grey-haired executive cut him off. How do we even know he's saying it right? For all we know, he's making it up. Marcus froze, his cheeks burned. Before he could speak, the client on the screen leaned closer, frowning. In Spanish, he said, I understand the boy perfectly, better than your paid interpreters. The room went still. The executive's mouth closed, his objection crumbling under the weight of the client's words. Marcus continued, finishing the exchange without missing a beat. By the end, the client's tone had softened, his hands no longer clenched, his voice steady as he confirmed the deal would move forward. The call ended, silence followed. Linda, sitting quietly near the corner, pressed a hand to her mouth. For years she had mopped these floors unseen. Now her son sat taller than men who had never noticed her at all. Ethan broke the silence. His voice carried no triumph, only conviction. Gentlemen, this isn't a fluke. Talent doesn't always wear a suit. And after today, none of us has the right to ignore it. The executives had no reply. They just stared at Marcus, who looked back at his mother with a quiet smile. The boardroom had emptied, but the air still felt charged. Coffee cups sat abandoned on the table, papers left scattered, as if no one wanted to stay a moment longer than necessary. Only 3 people remained, Ethan, Linda, and Marcus. Ethan stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, the city spread wide behind him. He turned and looked at Marcus. You didn't just save a deal today. You proved something bigger. I want to make it official, a paid apprenticeship. You'll work part-time with our communications team, learn, contribute, and get paid for it. Marcus blinked, stunned. His mouth opened, but no words came. He turned to his mother. Linda's heart swelled with pride, but it wasn't simple. She had seen her son overlooked, doubted, even mocked. And now, after one day, they wanted to put him in the middle of boardroom battles. Her stomach tightened. I don't know, she murmured, shaking her head. He's 15. He should be in school, not fixing the mistakes of grown men. She glanced at Ethan, this could be too much. Ethan's voice softened. You're right to worry. If I were in your place, I'd feel the same. But this isn't about using him as a tool. It's about recognizing what he's already doing. Yesterday, he saved us from disaster. Today, he secured a deal no one else could. That deserves more than a thank you. Linda crossed her arms, her voice trembling. I've cleaned this building for years. I've seen how promises are made in rooms like this. And I've seen how quickly they disappear when no one is watching. Marcus stepped closer to her. Mom, I want this. Not because it's shiny, not because it's money, but because it's a chance to do more than sit at the library and dream. I want to use what I've learnt. Tears pressed at Linda's eyes. Pride pulled her one way, fear the other. She didn't want to crush his dream, but she couldn't bear the thought of him being hurt by people who saw him as expendable. Ethan took a step forward. Then let me prove we mean it. Linda, I'll recommend you for lead custodian. Better pay, steadier hours, health benefits. You've earned it long before today. And Marcus, you'll have a mentor, real training and protections in writing. This isn't a favour, it's a partnership. Linda studied him, searching for the catch. For years she had taught herself not to trust men who spoke too smoothly. Yet the paper in Ethan's hand wasn't just talk. It was a contract, printed, signed, waiting for her to read. Her voice shook as she finally said, "We'll think about it." Ethan gave a small nod. "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, you'll have your answer then." Marcus looked at his mother, hope shining in his eyes. Linda looked back, torn between fear and belief. For the first time, the choice wasn't just about survival. It was about trust. The next morning, the boardroom looked even more intimidating than before. Polished wood, glass walls, and men in tailored suits who had built their careers on never being wrong. Marcus smoothed the front of his hoodie, wishing for the first time that he owned a jacket that didn't come from a thrift store. Linda trailed behind, quieter than usual. She wasn't there to clean this time. Ethan had asked her to sit in, just to see for herself. Still, she felt out of place in her work shoes. her hands twisting together as if she needed something to hold. Ethan opened the meeting. "Gentlemen, yesterday Marcus saved us from losing a major deal. Today I want you to see for yourselves what he can do." A few executives exchanged doubtful glances. One cleared his throat. "With all due respect, this is unorthodox. We're putting a company's reputation in the hands of a child." Marcus felt the heat rise in his cheeks, but he stayed silent. The client appeared on the screen, this time a partner from South America, speaking fast, frustration clear in his voice. The room tensed. Marcus leaned forward. His words flowed in Spanish, calm and respectful. He didn't just translate, he listened, catching the nuance, the frustration underneath, then relayed it to the room in plain, careful English. When Ethan spoke, Marcus translated back, smoothing rough edges, making sure nothing was lost. For 20 minutes, he kept the conversation alive, his voice steady, even when executives whispered doubts behind him. Slowly, the tension in the client's voice faded. By the end, the man on the screen was nodding, smiling even, as he confirmed the deal would move forward. The boardroom was silent when the call ended. Then Ethan spoke. "Well, still think this is a game?" No one answered. The chief financial officer looked down at his notes, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. Linda pressed a hand to her mouth, holding back tears. For years she had scrubbed these flaws invisible, and now her son was standing taller than anyone in the room. Marcus glanced at her, his expression calm but his eyes shining. He didn't need applause. The silence itself was proof enough. Ethan cleared his throat. "This is just the beginning. Starting today, we're creating a language access program, an initiative to make sure no voice goes unheard in this company, and Marcus will be part of it." Linda's breath caught. She looked at her son, then back at Ethan. It was happening, too fast, almost unreal. But in her heart, she knew this wasn't a dream. A month later, the building no longer felt the same. The break room still smelled of old coffee, the vending machine still hummed in the corner, but the people inside carried themselves differently. Linda now wore a badge that read lead custodian. Her uniform was the same, but the hours were steadier, the paycheck heavier, and for the first time in years, she didn't dread the end of the month. She walked the halls with her head a little higher, not invisible anymore. Marcus sat at a desk on the operations floor, his worn backpack still at his side. The same one he had carried to the library night after night. On the screen in front of him, contracts glowed in Spanish, Portuguese, and German. He answered questions from the team, patient and clear, showing them where small words carried big consequences. Ethan stopped by often now, not with orders but with questions. He had begun to see Marcus not as a boy, but as a voice that carried weight. More than once he admitted quietly, "You've reminded me what leadership really means." That evening, when the workday ended, Linda and Marcus walked home together. The streets of Newark buzzed with traffic, the smell of fried food drifting from a corner stand. Marcus swung his backpack over one shoulder, his sneakers scuffing the pavement. To anyone passing, they looked like nothing more than a tired mother and her teenage son heading home. But Linda felt the difference in every step. For years, she had worried her son would grow up unseen, his talent buried under the noise of survival. Now, she watched him walk beside her, steady, purposeful, his eyes brighter than she had ever seen. They passed the library where Marcus had spent countless evenings. He slowed for a moment, looking up at the familiar brick building. "That's where it started," he said softly. Linda smiled through the tears she refused to let fall. "And it's where you learned you were worth more than the world ever told you." Marcus nodded, gripping the strap of his backpack. "Sometimes the right words don't just change a contract, they change people." Linda slipped her arm around his shoulders as they crossed the street. To anyone watching, it was just a mother and her son. But to them, it was proof of something bigger, that dignity could grow in the unlikeliest places, and that the smallest voices, when finally heard, could echo louder than boardrooms and contracts combined. Lesson. At its heart, this story reminds us that real talent doesn't always wear a suit or come with a perfect resume. Sometimes it sits quietly in the break room, practicing in silence, waiting for a chance to be heard. True worth isn't measured by titles or background, but by the courage to step forward and use what you've learned to make a difference. Question, and it leaves us with something to think about. How many voices around us go unheard because we judge too quickly or never bother to listen? Thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care of your heart, hold on to your dignity, and remember, you're never invisible when you know your own worth. We'll see you again soon here on Rain Inside.